be talking about better mobile apps with ReactiveUI. I slightly edited the title because when I posted it on the .NET Virtual Group, it was too long. I can be long-winded. Anyways, I overstuffed it with a bunch of stuff. Daniel said Orlando Code Camp. Heard about it many times. Yes, I'll include the link. Remind me, I'll send the link for the call for sessions.
I may have submitted but not gotten in the past, but it just sounds very familiar to me for whatever.
Well, as a code camp, we really don't deny people unless we want everybody to speak. We are a free event. We're paid by sponsors, so we can't pay for travel, which is a limitation for some people. But we have people of all levels, local people who just want to get up and talk, and people who go to paid conferences and will try out something at our event, that kind of thing. But I'll include the call for speakers later. So anyways, we're gonna talk about mobile apps, ReactiveUI. First couple times I did this, I kind of just winged this talk. So I actually have slides, but it's actually too much stuff. And so I didn't even get to all the stuff I meant to do. So we'll kind of go through it. And if I come up short, or you guys have questions, I can lead you through some links that I have if this cooperates with me. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk. I'm talking about not to blow up myself, but just kind of if give you how I found it, my way to ReactiveUI, as it may kind of indicate some things you've had. Oh, I guess I should have asked. If I was in person, I would ask for a show of hands of how many people have actually released a mobile app to the app stores. Most of the time, I'm talking to people who just are interested, but they haven't done a lot of it themselves, or they're interested in ReactiveUI, but have never played with it or some of these other things. So I am going to kind of talk at a higher level and then kind of show you some views of ReactiveUI, if that makes sense. So anyways, I'm going to talk about my path, architecting for smart data consumption, which is a big issue for mobile, how ReactiveUI helps, give you some references, and save time at the end for questions. All right, part one, my path. All right, nope, yeah, okay. I switched the order. Anyway, so before we get into that, here's a bunch of things that you might want to take a screenshot, and I can make these slides available, but a bunch of links to parts of the ReactiveUI ecosystem. So sometimes ReactiveUI is just the MVVM framework, model view model framework. It also encapsulate a bunch of other projects that I'll refer to. And as I said, as I start talking about this stuff, people are saying, I don't know what you're talking about. And Daniel said he's reactive extensions for JavaScript a bit. It actually started in .NET, yes. There's a few things out there that started in the Microsoft world that some of the web people don't always acknowledge. It started with Microsoft. This is one of them. But yeah, so anyways, it was originally just a set of basically for asynchronous like streams of observables. So basically instead of so you want to be able to hook into a stream and if see things at different points instead of waiting for the result. Now we got into this a lot more of async stuff later, and there's ways to hook into event streams and other methods, but it's based on an iObservable if you've seen that. And we'll talk about a little bit that later. ReactiveUI is a model view model framework built on top of it for all platforms, and the list is very long for the .NET platforms, including Avalonia and all that. You might run across, done by the same people, or maintained by the same people, Refit, which is a library for auto-generating a lot of the HTTP client boilerplate. ActiveAtch is a key value store, but it does some smart ways of storing your information about data that you pull across the network. And Splat does some fancy things. Oh, sorry, I saw a prompt and I realized it was somebody waiting to get in the meeting room. Splat can do service location and a bunch of other things with it. Dynamic data is just a way of handling operations that are over the top of be able to basically projections of data instead of modifying the data stream. It's like a super powerful way to hack into your collections. All right, so a little bit of my mix of my history and the history of this project. I've seen 2008 or 2009 reactive extensions created by Microsoft, early 2001 or 2011, ReactiveUI. Xamarin Forms came in there about May 2014, if you recall. So that's since been retired, which I don't have a slide on here. I started working in Android, iOS, Windows Phone for a new job that I had for .NET. So Xamarin Forms, I was in the very early stages. So I understand that people have said if you're new to mobile, .NET MAUI could be a little much, but back in the day, it was like ancient history of how it's just some very basic stuff yourself. But so started using Refit, which is one of the libraries I mentioned in Activatch in that point on my first projects for that, and got into view model navigation. It was you might have run across this since, but it was kind of something new back then. But and I'll get into a little bit, but just an architecture pattern because the first I bring this up because the first a well-known MVM framework, the first time I used it for Xamarin Forms kept blowing up because it didn't have the navigation pattern working correctly, and view model first navigation or view model navigation solved that. .NET MAUI announced. I saw a talk about from Michael Stonis, who's a Microsoft MVP, who's spoken frequently on ReactiveUI. I saw about that, and I started using it in a job that solved a lot of these issues. And then, of course, after that, .NET MAUI was released. All right, so mobile is all about data, smart data consumption, and architecture. The way to at least solve it to avoid the problems that most people run into. So I'm going to talk a little about that and then ReactiveUI. So I've done this from another talk, but using different perspectives on data. A user just cares that they have access to their data being the services, the utilities. They just care that they have their house, that everything works on the left. Everything works, and then it kind of, lights turn on. They don't really care how it gets there. When they turn on the faucet, the water runs. I didn't have an electrical one, but for the website is about pushing that data so that it's the client is relatively dumb. I mean, it can have some JavaScript user interface stuff, but it's pushing the data, and it's always the focus is on the server cloud side. In the mobile app world, we make a lot of decisions about when to consume data. And also in testing with this, related to that, is because you could do things like store your own data, that you implement your own data store to do smart decisions, like in the solar or wind case, where you're trying to decide whether I'm trying to go into the grid to get the data or not. Data being electricity in this example. Okay, so talk a little bit about a mobile architecture, the simple view. Again, this is from another talk, but with an API controller, you've got data mappers on the right. And most of the focus is on just basically getting the data from the data source and presenting it over the web, in the middle section, to your simplified mobile client. But you have to make smart decisions about how you're consuming that data, because again, you may have your phone, you're wandering around. I have two of them that I carry at all times, Android and iOS. And I have literally a filing cabinet drawer full of devices because the world of mobile is cross-platform, is complicated. But you're not always having a connection. Obviously, you have to just pull enough data over that thin little wire, or virtual wire, to make sure you have the data. And when you don't have a signal, you want to be able to store it. In this case, there's a few different complications with the platform cache or database cache. Database cache, when I was talking about Activatch, it uses the database cache of SQLite that you can run on the operating system that does a lot of complex storing. And I'll get into a little bit more about that later. But the navigation logic versus the web world, where you're doing it on the server, you're doing navigation yourself. And this is a simplified version. I'll show a little bit more on the architecture. So basically, repeating what I said, but you want smart data pipes to decide when to consume data to the app. But as we get into the real world, we start talking about model view model, and which is a common architecture, which I have a slide on coming up. But moving that data so that you get separation concerns, be able to test it in certain MVM frameworks. You're able to test your view models directly. API services, instead of just having one project, I should say I had a demo that Visual Studio failed me because I couldn't run anything because I couldn't update Android SDK. It had the old classical way of doing it, and it had a reactive UI. Now it's my fault for being a bad developer and not testing it till last night. But I was going to show this demo, but the usual layout when you start doing something is you have one project that has your view models, your data, and all the rest of that. If what I'm going to talk about in reactive UI helps, presentation driven development. Yeah, so that's as Daniel says, I am going to wing it a few times, and hopefully, you know, hopefully you guys are satisfied, and you're not throwing virtual tomatoes, but we'll go with it. But data services decide whether to call the local database cache, platform cache, API endpoint, service, etc., whether to actually consume that data. All right. Before I get into talking about the data side of it, talking about MVVM. Now, this is just a typical thing. This is literally from Wikipedia, a view model and your model. But there's a little bit, and I don't have a diagram for it. I need to make one. I couldn't find one. But so when you see, if you first run into MVVM, you may see where the views call each other. So view being your page, depending on what your platform calls it, but your view. So your actual page, you load on the app, you have your page. That, when you go to click on a button, it calls another view in the default easy way of doing it. The view model is then instantiated behind the scenes that pulls up and connects your bucket to has your buckets and logic to connect to your models and do that. Now the problem can be, because the view model, depending on how you do it, is like I said, it's got the buckets to store the data. But it's common to have a situation where if you start with the view, instantiate a view model, and then the buckets are not defined by the time you try to load the data, it can blow up when you go from view to view. So you get this chicken and the egg situation. But there's another way, which is if instead what you do, sort of reverse that, a dotted line from the view model to the view, which is you navigate from your view model. So like your login page, you would have a login page and a login view model. The view model handles the navigation, and then you instantiate the view from the view model. So you define your buckets and your data access, and then you load the presentation layer second, and then you constantly navigate to the view model. It also allows you to do things like testing, which I'll get into later. All right, so this is just the previous, a little bit more refined. I should say, I skipped, but I should say this is kind of actually how my path that I found ReactiveUI is. I was first dealing with navigation issues in a well-known MVVM framework when I first got into this. And I started looking at view model navigation. And Matt Sokop, who you might know, is a Azure, works on the Azure team for Microsoft, and was a Xamarin, came from Xamarin originally. Did a system that I used actually for some successful, my own version of it, successful apps that did view model navigation first on my way to getting this. But so again, this is a network view of the where you have it, and the data service, an intermediate data service to view models, and your different caches. In this case, I have API service 1, API service 2 that can call to different things. I worked for Golf Channel and did a rewrite of their apps years ago. They had 5 different API services we had to all interact that are run by different departments, and so there was no common thing. So they had to be tested separately, which is kind of an impetus on how another part on my path to getting to this. But it so you may be consuming it from multiple sources, but this is the network view. So if we start making it a little more complicated, but actually how you would structure your app to consume from these different sources. And I'll take this one more step further before we get back into the reactive UI. If you've got a variety of view models, So you got to use view models. The view models call to a common data service that controls your caching issues. And then your API library. If you implement your data mapping as an API, as separate API libraries that talk to different APIs, you can do some more complicated things. So I expanded, I took the previous one and I just expanded, I just reformatted it, dropped the details on the right side to basically be the data mapper to these controllers. But if you take it another step further, now I know this is very complicated, and I try not to be one to overcomplicate, but there's an architecture that allows you to test. And I'm going to talk more about the left side of this than the right, but which is another talk. But if you test your view models, if you think of your app running on your phone, if you go to test, if you want to test the data, which is the majority of the testing you're doing, and not the presentation, I mean, depending on what you're doing, but overall, I would say the majority of stuff is testing what's coming across the wire. If you wanted to be able to test that your change has implemented in the logic, if you test the app, you're maybe overcomplicating it. What you really want to test is the data. Since mobile and API are so intertwined and so data dependent, you want to be able to have an infrastructure to be able to test the data. So this, we're going to talk. I was going to talk about more about the view model testing, but related to this is API testing on the right. So if you had your source, I'm not sure if my mouse is showing up because I can't see. But in the API 1, API 2, if you're testing it, you can test it by a REST client over here that could be Postman. But that data gets translated by your library. So for example, in the golf world, it has a general set of scoring data that gets translated into a leaderboard. If you test that leaderboard for a golf event while it's going on, because of course it's a news organization, they don't have historical data, you can be able to see the results as it changes. The same thing is, as you go through and you pull the data in, and then you do it to your app through your data service, which you can have caching, you can also test your view models. So the back end of your code to your back end of your app code versus your library code to be able to test that to see if it's performing without testing the UI pattern. So because we all know UI testing can be the hardest of all. I'm excluding government integration testing like healthcare.gov or something where you're dealing with outdated systems, but UI testing, I think nobody would prefer to do UI testing if they can get away with it. I might ask show of hands if I was in person, but we'll kind of skip that for now. All right, so we're going to talk more about this, but this is just kind of the architecture of where I'm going. I should have mentioned that active attributes I mentioned, their caching will help with the caching, well, the database caching, and refit, which I talked about for the HTTP client stuff, will help with the API library. But okay, so reactive extensions. So built on top of, based on iObservable. So instead of having a collection and be able to just pull data and then update it yourself, you can instead hook into a stream basically of observable. So you have this example on the right here is you have a timer that sets up a bunch of ticks without a due time that ticks every 1 second. And so this becomes an observable using link extensions for reactive that you hook in, that you subscribe, and you're able to write this out. So you'll see this if you looked at there's a book on rx.net, but on their sample. But you'll say to tick every second, it'll start doing that. You don't have to go and check things. You're not spinning and running. You're not looping. You're just waiting to hook you're into this pipeline of data. And you can do a lot more complicated link queries over the top of it. So that we can, to be able to hook into this, to be able to respond to that, and also cancellation and other things, but just as a simple example with reactive extensions. So that's the base foundation. All right, ReactiveUI, we get into is built over the top of it, but it's a model view model framework, but it's a light one. It's not very prescriptive. It be able to hook in things, and then be able to do there's ways to do some custom and automatic property change notifications. It also, oh, I guess I should have added something. I meant to. So if anybody has fooled around with the MVVM framework, the MVVM, the Microsoft MVVM toolkit, a lot of it, if you might, when I show the stuff on properties, will be related to what is in the reactive UI world, is they kind of took that idea. And there are people within the Xamarin and Maui team that are fans also of reactive UI, but it's not been adopted full blown. It's just something that sits side by side. It's another framework that you can use it. But there are some elements of MVI toolkit when I get into the property stuff. But the key thing with, if you've done mobile development, there's on the UI thread, you want to make sure that stuff that happens in the background versus stuff that happens on the UI thread, you want to not block the UI thread. So you're actually, there are ways in any mobile platform to be able to handle that, but you can actually tell it to look where, basically check where to observe. So thread scheduling. So in here, on this value, on this, which I took from the ReactiveUI site, but I'm going to kind of go through it before I get to some of the next stuff. But when it's as a search query, it wants to wait and check every 0.8 seconds, and it has a scheduler for that. So basically a task pool that basically you're doing thread scheduling, but be able to check on the background for this, whether it's been 0.8 of a second. So you're checking to see if anything's changed. And then you look at this select statement, which is query, take that query and trim it down, has anything, and then detect if it's changed, distinct until changed. So don't do anything until the user has pressed a button, until you've waited to see that the user has pressed a button in the intervening time. If they pressed a bunch of buttons, you basically wait till that's over, till it's changed, and then start searching. So if the query is not null, okay, we don't do anything unless the query is not null, and then go back on the main thread scheduler. So you're basically on the UI, and then you can do a commit. So you're actually, this is where you would do interactive search, but you would wait till you wouldn't, like every time a key is pressed, or virtual or otherwise, you wouldn't start searching. I don't know if you've ever used like some domain. I look for domains every once in a while when I get an idea for a business. And some domain search apps, like I start typing, and then I say, let's say I start with an A. I hit an A and it starts searching for names beginning with A. Well, I haven't expressed what I want to, so now you're going and start searching. I take let's say I want to type amount, which is random, but the first word that came to me. It starts searching, and then you start getting timeouts, because Whois is a network service that times out if you basically flood it with network requests, because they're not waiting to see that the user stop typing before they actually start searching. You can flood the network, but also you're just doing it. And I don't want to, it's not about the particular implementation, but it's a pet peeve of mine, because it's flooding the network, and then the Whois times out after not very long, because it's searching constantly instead of waiting to see if the user's at a pause, basically. But so I did a bunch of things that if you built an app that did this, that waited, I'm going to wait every 0.8 of a second. Did they actually have some input? Then I'm actually going to make sure I'm on the UI thread, and then I'm going to call this command. You could be, a large chunk of code just to do that kind of stuff, but you can kind of hook into that flow of information, if that makes sense. I know this is the first time I'm really showing code. So is there if I stumped anybody, or people kind of get what I'm saying, maybe raise your hands if you're kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about. All right. Okay. So
to
I'm
me,
going to
this
keep
is
going.
pretty similar to like events, right? Where you say behind the scenes, it's probably just like holding a list of things to call when this trigger happens, right? And the trigger here is 0.8 seconds, and and the distinct until changed, I guess.
Yes. So instead of writing a bunch of event-based code to do this manually and checking or adding delegates and taking delegates away and all that kind of stuff, it's just to kind of get, like I said, it's that pipeline. You're hooking into the stream to make sure you're responding it, but you can nest things on one after the other to be able to get this data, maybe to get this to operate over this data, if that makes sense. All right, let's see. Actually, so now it's not responding, or did I put two of the same? Okay, where's the other one? Okay, sorry about that. All right, so here's another common scenario. Say you want to be able to make a connect two properties. You can have it wire so that when any value in one updates, so basically, so we have a first name, last name. We have a formatted name, which is basically an output property. And this is an attribute that we'll be able to actually automatically implement in the background. But when any value for this first name first name and last name, when any of them together changes, then we can output this to this property behind the scenes. But it's basically listening to that. So it's a more data oriented and less event oriented, but it's done through observing changes. Now there's a variety of different I notify property changed. If you've ever had to write all that code, it gets can get redundant and complicated. But there's a complex system that they can do where they'll be able to hook into these things to be able to change things. Or a very common one I didn't put in here, but is like login on a login screen, username, password. You want things to blank out, or you can't actually log in until you put in username and password. This doesn't deal with passkeys in this my scenario, but you want to be able to check those fields and not proceed, but without having to manually check events or tie events to other events. And well, I guess I should have said the other part we're talking about is this is in the view model. So instead of doing in your view layer, doing a bunch of event-based checking, if you push your decisions further down in the view model, you can actually make these decisions. But also, when you get into things, you can test them more directly in your view model. So in your logic layer, your function, your business logic, your testing, everything else layer, you can test them instead of having dependent on the UI. If you set up your view models in such a way that you're actually doing dependency injection of your services into your view model, you can test your view models independently of your UI. You could hook up something like LinkPad to your view models and be able to initiate tests. Now, automated test systems as well, but just be able to test this stuff directly. All right. Commanding structure. So taking for another one. So if you want to be able to create a command that you want to respond, you create the result as a task, just an async task that you want to. And the first block is what you're actually going to do once this second block, which is when any value, when the username password, they're both null or white space. Then you can actually, until this actually happens, you're not allowed to proceed. But you're doing it, hooking in one to the other so that you can block it going to proceed and try to process that until you've actually had both of those to be satisfied. You can make it more complicated than that, obviously, a minimum character or complexity or something like that. And then, okay, so refit. Refit I talked about earlier is a way to do automatic HTTP client stuff. It auto generates code behind the scenes. If you've ever had to write HTTP client stuff, it can get very redundant fast, and especially if you have to maintain and do similar things, and you say you apply the same authentication logic all over the place or something like that. But if you define your interface and there's some complex, you can do some complex attribute-based, fluent manipulation and handle with tokens and the rest of it, you can define your interface and then be able to just get the data directly from that when it auto generates a lot of the stuff behind the scenes. Another thing, you were defining it this way as an interface instead of directly in your code. You assuming your test QA or your dev QA in production are at the same level of version of your database, you could have all of them actually be running in your app and just be a different API. So if you wanted to easily switch, now caching makes it more complicated, but if you want as a client on your mobile app, if you wanted to be able to switch between test what it looks like in dev, QA, production, assuming you have those environments, which not everybody does, I know, but you have multiple environments, you want to be able to switch, and they're at the same level as versioning, in which case there's not incompatibility as far as basically your interface. You could be able to switch. You could have a drop down in your dev page or about page in your app that you could switch between dev, QA, and production, because you're creating an instance of each one. And as long as the mapping is correct to the API, it will auto generate code, which will be the same. If it's different versions or more complicated, obviously you'd have to handle that yourself. Okay. And then dynamic data. Dynamic data is so basically you're taking a observable collection over the top of an existing source of data. And in this case, they have this list, and then they're taking a cached version of it. This is from a trading app, but the trade and I forget what the value is on here. But it's the ID. So your trade ID, and then you're having an operation where you connect to this source of this cache of the original list. You can filter it. So this is things like filtering, transforming. You would be able to operate over it. Instead of manipulating the different list or directly manipulating a copy of the list, you can basically project into a cached version that you can then do a lot of complex operations over. So if the trade status is live, you can transform it into this proxy, sort it based on different ways, on the timestamp descending in this case. And then this is where you get into your thread management. And then you output it into this list, which is a read-only collection. And then you dispose of it there are certain cache operations where you have to actually get rid of the underlying subscription, where you have to get underlying hooks basically, and then you subscribe to that. So basically you can have your underlying list and be able to project it. And then if I had been able to do this when I was a Golf Channel, and the stuff I had to do for sorting and timestamps and all the rest of this would have saved me so much effort, but at that point I didn't know about it. But dynamic data is something supported by one of the implementers of ReactiveUI. All right. So actually, I didn't get to all the stuff that I wanted. Let me just show you a few. Well, let me go to the references, and then I'll show you a few websites, and then I'll have time for questions. Okay, so there is the original. If anybody wants to take a picture of this, the presentation that I first learned about ReactiveUI is on Michael Stonis's 8-bot reactive examples site. It's for Xamarin Forms, so you might have some issues running it. If I get some free time, I plan to port that over and some of the other examples over to .NET MAUI. There's a couple good books. I have them here, reactiveextensions.net. This is about the reactive extensions. And then for the reactive UI stuff, this is mostly WPF. Or this is WPF, because Kent Bogart was the original, one of the maintainers of ReactiveUI. I'm looking for a UI example. Of course, I'm not finding one. But when you get into the really complex, the link part stuff, yeah, I just saw some pictures. I was trying to show you. It probably shows and I lost the page. Anyways, so that's a good book. He's self-published it. He's one of the original maintainers of ReactiveUI. And then here's just the links that I mentioned earlier about the different libraries. I'm a little shorter, a few minutes shorter, so I can either start with questions or show you some other stuff that I wanted to cover that I didn't make slides for. Is there any questions in the chat? Okay, let me go to, let's see. Can I move this out of the way? I'm trying to move the, well, it's not letting me, so let me, oh, of course it moved
But
my
then
monitor around.
my thoughts were going to be more around the website usage with it. So I'm curious what your
The
examples
web,
are.
the website usage.
Yeah, I think you
Um,
said you had a couple.
oh,
Oh, someone did ask in chat though, how difficult is it to debug? Does it change at all when you're using reactive versus
so
events or just method?
it's, so
And I would expand
there's,
that to say debug and test. Does the testing change also?
well, so, see if I can show you something that, but basically, so you're able to hook it. I don't have I was trying to fit on the slides. I'm trying to show a complex example of where you can hook in and do, okay, so, let's see, that's not the one I wanted. Let me go to see if I find something over here. Sorry, I changed my monitor resolution. It seems to have taken over. Why is okay, I'm going to put the chat to the other window because it seems to have taken over my, but basically you're to be able to, you can subscribe to you can have your exceptions be handled. You can have on one path, you can have a standard exception response. Let's see. I'm trying to see one that has, okay. But you're hooking into it, so you'll be able to test it. So you can have a standard exception response. That exception out of the observable stream happens. You can do, of course, now I can't find it. So you could just side effect when it completes. You can have it right, result on that. It's testing it, and you actually can replay it in the sense of that it's task-based stuff. You can't basically restart it. You can restart it with observables because it's that stream that you can actually change the order of. Well, sorry, it's basically like a rewind. Just trying to see if I can find the example I'm looking for, and now I can't seem to find it. That's that. It's reactive extensions book, the ReactiveUI. But so I should. So it's part of the .NET Foundation. The question of let's see, that doesn't have the full list. Where is the full list? Yeah, so this is, I was trying to, of all the different, of course, you can never find the stuff when you're, yeah, so this isn't even up to date, but MVM frameworks, ReactiveUI, it's not what I was looking at. I wanted the target frameworks. This is probably the easier way. So we have Blazor over here. We've got Maui. We've got WinForms, WPF, WinUI 3, the Xamarin Forms, obviously, and .NET Maui. Let's see. It seems like I'm missing. Where's the Avalonia stuff? I know it's in there. Of course, here we go. That's what I was looking for. So it's got its own for testing. It's got WPF, UWP, although that's retired, obviously. WinForms is still kicking around. They've got a separate one for Android directly versus cross-platform. Uno, they've actually got two packages for Uno, Avalonia. There's a validation library, Tizen. If you see in Xamarin Forms and Tizen and .NET MAUI, Tizen is Samsung TVs, so you can write for that. They support basically every UI framework that's not ASP.NET for Microsoft. But anything in the desktop mobile world, it's, you know, Blazor is the closest, which is, you know, obviously using these other tools to target the web. But let's see. I was trying to find that command for the testing. But yes, you can, of course, find a more complex example when I'm looking for it. Now that's refit. Let's see. But basically you're hooking, it's that that pipeline, so it's easier in a sense to test that, and you can do more automated testing. Plus, like I said, you can, it's not the only one that allows you to test view models directly, but it is a big one that you can easily set up. I don't have an example for that right now in front of me. Is there any way to create a graph to identify property command registrations? The way to answer that would be to go to the example that I had in my slides. Let's see. So yeah, in this case where you're doing this formatted name, this property, this automatically saves, you're creating it as an observable property that's going to get the result of this action here. But you're tying it to that. Now you can also have other flags, but it's not that it's not like it's, I think more of is like an issue with delegates where you're thinking about things are actually multiple things hooking into it at the same time, but you're actually it's not really a problem with collisions because you're just you're setting your logic to actually make the to the blocking as you're going to do implementing it. So if you're worried about basically one value being overwritten by another property, it's not really an issue that usually comes up. It's usually more that you're blocking yourself because you don't realize your logic is in the way, is the way I'd answer that. But as far as the graph, that's not built into there's no tool built in, but that'd be tooling that would actually show you how those registrations happen. Sorry, I hope that answers your question, Victor.
Well, I wanted to make sure I don't know if you wanted to shout out the virtual user group or something, you got the chance to do that. I know you help lead that as well, or you're an organizer of it at least.
So some of you maybe joined from the .NET virtual user group. There's a bunch of people that maintain it. James Montemagno, who's from a Xamarin employee that came to Microsoft, and some of the other, he's the original organizer. I'm not the organizer, the overall organizer. I just have access. But if you guys want to see about getting added to it, since you do a lot of virtual groups, then I'll see, I can help you with that, or I can repost your events to begin with. And until we get you added, since you're doing a lot of, we're our group. I run Orlando.NET user group. And we haven't done a bunch of, we've been doing either cross-posting local events or having local speakers to try to build back our stuff. It reminds me, I don't have I haven't updated Code Camp because we're helping another thing. Our event is April 11th, and which is of next year for Orlando Code Camp, which is on the north side of it. I live on the south side where this is Sean Walker and me at the keynote. For some reason, I'm holding my arm like I'm in pain, but I'm not. I probably was cold. So that's Sean Walker was doing talk about open source. similar event in Orlando, and yeah, so we're the Code Camp is our big event. And I'm going to put this back to that's in the spring. Sunshine and theme parks is the selling point. I didn't even get into some of the. No, I didn't realize I skipped. Acrobat, you can do complex things like, say you want a long-running operation, you want to get the current set of data, but you can have it trigger a request in the back end, but give you the currently stored data and some of that stuff. But look into a lot of these, even if you don't use all of it or together. I brought it up together because they're interrelated, but also, you know, a lot of this is useful. Refit, I don't know why anybody doesn't or still uses HTTP client stuff personally. There are other caching ones, but Acrobat is very powerful. Splat got a service locator that I use for dependency injection without having to have an instance at all the time. And the dynamic data, especially stuff like filtering over streams, is very helpful. So if there's no other questions.
Cool. Okay, well, appreciate you taking the time to present and volunteering, Andy. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks. Apologies for the little hiccups, the several
No, it's
hiccups.
all good. Yeah,
problem.
that's part of local .NET user groups is
Yeah.
we're just here to support you.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Andy. Thanks everyone for joining. Looking forward to seeing people in person next month.
Yeah.
Hope you can make it out. November 20th, Austin.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. Bye.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See y'all.